Everybody wants to recapture the magic of the 2005 Nickelodeon animated series Avatar: The Last Airbender. We've had spiritual successors like Voltron, Legendary Defender, and The Dragon Prince. We've had multiple live-action adaptations. We've had a direct sequel in The Legend of Korra, and so it's only a matter of time before we get another entry in the fictional future of the Avatar franchise. I have no idea what it would be about, what would happen, or how it would go, and I am not going to work on it or be put in charge of deciding what kind of story it would be. But if I was, here's how I would do it. If I were to write a hypothetical sequel series to The Legend of Korra and Avatar: The Last Airbender, I would send the protagonist on a road trip, give them clear character wants as well as character needs, and make them an ordinary, regular person who is thrust into a new life of adventure when they discover that they are the Avatar. I know this is a lot, and I know it's silly, but this is how I would write an Avatar cartoon. When you look back at the main characters of each series, one of the most common themes among them is that of high status. Prince Zuko is a prince, Toph Beifong is rich, Katara and Sokka are the children of a water tribe chief, Korra is the daughter of the water tribe chief, Asami Sato is rich, and even though Mako and Bolin began the series in poverty, Bolin becomes a movie star, and Mako becomes a police officer as well as the bodyguard of the Earth Kingdom's heir. Everyone is either a leader of their society or a direct agent of one, with the only real exception being Avatar Aang. So what I think we need is a new Avatar who is simply just a regular person. Obviously, the title of Avatar is a high status in of itself, given that it's a Chosen One narrative, but what I'm saying is that the Chosen One in this narrative should be somebody who can come from anywhere and can be anyone. An Avatar who lives in the middle of nowhere, who comes from an ordinary family with ordinary friends, and has the most common name in the franchise's universe. Avatar Lee. Imagine this. Once upon a time, in a small remote town within the Earth Kingdom, a young teenager named Lee has been training every day to learn the ability of earthbending. Their dream is to one day live in the lap of luxury as a famous metal-bending sculpture artist where they will be rich and famous with no problems in life whatsoever. But just when they're all set to show off what they've learned in a town ceremony, something strange happens. They take up their stance and swing their fist, but instead of moving the earth, fire erupts from their hands, because Lee isn't just an earthbender, they're the Avatar. And this revelation doesn't make Lee's life easier, it makes their life exponentially harder, because for the past few years, somebody else has already been claiming that they're the Avatar, and when he finds out that a random commoner has been bending multiple elements, he announces to the world that the Dark Avatar has returned, and sets out to hunt Lee down. This is our story's plot. We have a bougie Avatar who only protects the interests of the ruling class, and an Avatar who is an ordinary person, an average Lee, who is forced to go on the run after they are framed as an imposter by the bougie Avatar. As they're joined by their best friend and their childhood crush, not only must Lee travel across the world to master all four bending elements, they must prove their innocence and unravel the mystery behind the two avatars. By having the main protagonist become a fugitive with the whole world turned against them, we get to have the road trip premise again, make finding a bending teacher for each element feel like even more of an impossible task, and put the protagonist in situations that challenge their character. Where Aang wanted to be a normal kid but needed to take on the responsibility of the Avatar, and Korra wanted to be the Avatar but needed to understand what that really means, Avatar Lee wants to be comfortable, but needs to put that comfort aside to fulfill their avatar duties to the common people. They're an ordinary person who comes from nowhere, but the lie their character believes is that they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps to advance along the economic ladder, that they can one day live an easy life with nothing to worry about. Only to find that their destiny as the Avatar forces them to live in infamy and camp out in the wilderness, forces them to wear a disguise while traveling through towns and cities, with the Avatar state activating against their own will if Lee sees injustice and pretends to ignore it. Maybe one day they do get a chance at the life they want, where they can be this incredible artist living in a luxury high-rise city, but then Lee witnesses all the pain that's happening within it, all the artists who are exhausted from crunch time, all the laborers being exploited for their work, all the homeless living on the street, and all the people they could be helping if they were acting as the Avatar, because everyone deserves to have simple comforts, and everyone deserves to be happy.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady. And give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
Over the course of their character arc, Lee will go from being someone who used to buy into a corrupt system to becoming the one who breaks that system. Aang's story was about responsibility, Korra's story was about maturity, and now Lee's story is about leaving your comfort zone. Because doing good isn't a passive action, it's an active one. You have to step outside of yourself to empathize with people, to place your faith in human beings, organize communities, give money to the homeless, and ask others if they need help. As far back as the Great Divide episode of The Last Airbender, there's been this whole above-it-all attitude, which combined with a loose definition of the word balance and The Legend of Korra's defense of the status quo, has made the Avatar series feel at times politically condescending. And the way to fix this isn't to return everything to how it was, but to set out in a new direction. The next Avatar cartoon shouldn't tap into the imagery of its prequels for mere nostalgia, it should recontextualize previous story themes and re-examine what the shows may have accidentally been saying with them. We're not going to retcon the events of Korra or erase the fact that its society became more industrialized. We're going to make revolutionary characters be the good guys instead of the villains. Make working class individuals like the cabbage merchant into subjects of empathy rather than just gag characters. And write an Avatar who makes some of the same decisions as Aang and Korra, but frame those decisions as being the wrong choices. When there's a generational conflict between two groups of people, it's not going to be handled by lying to them or treating them like they're both stupid. It's going to be handled with nuance and finding the truth. When Lee spends the whole series pining after a love interest, it's not going to be treated like it's a given that they'll end up together. It's going to be treated as though just because you like someone doesn't mean you're in love. That you're not entitled to them just because you're nice. Basically, whatever I consider to be mistakes that Airbender and Korra made are going to be fuel for what my story is going to tackle. And I don't just want to do this with Avatar Lee, I want to do this with the bougie Avatar, whose official name would be something more like Avatar Gene, the rival of the story whose philosophy would be that very same loose definition of balance taken to its worst possible interpretation, where he might bring about peace and order to the world, but not justice. He'll settle disputes, but his sheltered, warped view of impartiality leads him to constantly punish both sides without properly investigating the situation. He has loads of insecurities, but he bottles them up in order to act like the perfect avatar he thinks he should be. He preaches non-violence, but treats revolutionaries as though they're just as bad as their oppressors for taking things too far. Because he doesn't see the nuance in the world, he only sees the shallow oversimplifications, as if he were someone who based their entire worldview on what was dictated in a certain previous Avatar cartoon.
Those guys were totally out of balance, and they took their ideologies too far.
While I promise I'm not trying to make the Legend of Korra references feel too on the nose, I do want Jean's Team Avatar to be an entourage of movie stars, police captains, and rich people. But one other idea I'm thinking of having is that Avatar Jean genuinely believes that he is the true Avatar, and actually thinks Lee is an imposter. Or maybe even have it be that both of them are the true Avatar, that the Avatar spirit split in half and reincarnated into two people instead of one this time, where neither one of them is the evil dark Avatar that they initially perceive each other to be. The twist behind the double Avatar conspiracy could be that it's not actually a conspiracy. It's not a malicious attempt to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. It's just that the reincarnation was different this time, and an arrogant rich guy jumped straight into the idea of an imposter rather than bothering to consider any alternative. I realize some might find this disappointing or far-fetched, but it lines up with the ideas that I'm trying to bring to the table here, that the real world is complicated and nuanced, that not everything is exactly how you assume it to be. Maybe Avatar Jean will be the story's Azula or Ozai, but if he can internalize some of these ideas and break out of his old mentality, maybe he'll end up as the story's Zuko, who gets his own redemption arc and becomes the Avatar of Order to Lee's Avatar of Justice, the yin to each other's yang, but each working as a force for good by the end of the story. Let's talk about creators. If I've said anything unkind about Bryan Konietzko and Michael Dante DiMartino, I would like to apologize for that, and while I still disagree with the political subtext in early Korra, I would be willing to work with them on the franchise that they came up with. I think Bryan and Mike are very good at storyboarding, choreography, and designing characters, but the best place for their talents would be in the director and producer's chairs rather than the writer's room. I know I used to have a high opinion of Aaron Ehasz, but given how he's allegedly treated his coworkers and employees in the past, I don't think he should be around if we want to have a good working environment. I think the best case scenario for an Avatar sequel is to bring back maybe a couple previous staff writers like Elizabeth Welsh, but really focus on hiring new creators that would just be a really good fit for the Avatar style, with my number one choice being N.D. Stevenson. I think his work on She-Ra and Nimona has been incredible, and he absolutely needs to work on the franchise at some point. Whatever the next Avatar sequel series is going to be, N.D. Stevenson should be its showrunner and a major creative force behind it. If it feels like there are holes in my story or I don't have every little detail planned out, well, that's because I don't. I'm not expecting this to be a real, actual thing that officially exists, and even if I did, I would not be ready to immediately start production on it if somebody from Nickelodeon gave me an offer right after I posted this. I would need a lot more experience working in the industry first, and I would need a lot more professionals to help with additional drafts, because just like what happened with the creation of Toph Beifong, there's probably a ton of genius revisions to my story out there that I'm not going to be the one to think of. I would need to find the right balance between action and comedy, but also spend a lot more time working on the script so that the interactions actually feel nuanced rather than like a cliched sitcom, and make sure I actually show interior character psychology rather than ignoring it, avoiding it, or confusing it for something else. I would need to establish setups for whatever I want to be a dramatic payoff, and I would need to keep reiterating so that I don't always stick with the very first thing I think of. Avatar may have always been a fusion of Asian influences with American contexts, but I would need to study more Asian philosophies so that I'm not just filtering things through my limited perspective. And I would need to work with martial arts instructors to figure out the choreography, as well as to bring in more fighting styles. I would need to make sure there aren't any conflicts with the Avatar canon, especially in stories that I haven't experienced yet, and I promise I'm not trying to rip off the false Avatar idea from the Kyoshi novels. I just think it's really neat, and the way that I'm trying to do it should be different enough as it is. But I will still recognize that I need to spend a lot more time working with my concepts in general. Like, I don't even have the funny animal companion figured out right now. Maybe there's a capybara mole or a cat or something. I don't know. This is not an announcement or calling my shot or predicting what would happen in a future fully animated series. This is a very rough outline for what I've been able to come up with so far. And the reason why I decided to share this with you is the same reason I started making this How I Would Write series, as well as the same reason I started doing media criticism to begin with. I have stuff in my brain that I need to let out into the world. I have things to say that only I can say, visions that only I can imagine, ideas that only I can put into reality. I want to make things. This is the stuff I live for, my raison d'etre. I don't just want to sit around and always criticize from the outside looking in. I want to take what I've learned from my analysis and make something of my own, reach for the stars, and attempt to achieve what might have been previously impossible. Maybe Avatar: The Last Airbender was this lightning in a bottle, once-in-a-lifetime monumental feat of animation that no sequel or spiritual successor can ever surpass. But even so, I still think it's worth trying to. I think it's worth imagining new stories not as soulless reboots or risk-free returns to existing properties, but as personal projects built out of the complex feelings you have for the original. Whether that project ends up being a work of fanfiction or a silly pitch bible turned video essay that you're only writing as a creative exercise because you're an insane person like me. If I had carte blanche to design my very own Avatar sequel, I would write a show called Avatar: The Journey of Lee, a story about an ordinary teenager from the middle of nowhere with dreams of becoming rich and famous until they discover that they are the Avatar, and get branded as a fugitive by a rich, powerful person claiming to also be the Avatar. I would focus on a hero who is a regular person and have them set out on a road trip that is also a spiritual journey, where they develop over the course of their story into a more selfless young adult as they are constantly forced outside of their comfort zone. I would use my critiques of The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra to build a new story that explores the dangers of blaming both sides and shallow definitions of balance, where characters learn to see the nuanced complexity in the world and set aside their dreams for the good of all people. That is how I would write an Avatar cartoon.